And welcome back, or welcome to On Coaching with Magness and Marcus. I'm Steve Magness, the Deputy Director of High Performance West, joined by my good friend and colleague, John Marcus, the Director of High Performance West. This is the On Coaching podcast, where we take you through, obviously, coaching, performance, running, and our favorite, intellectual tangents. John, we're back.
I love intellectual tangents. That's what the people want. Lots of tangents.
That is what we're known for. So if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back, my friends, but expect some tangents. So before we get to our tangents, let's set our constraint for this episode. And what we're going to talk about is the difference between average, good, and great.
Which is a huge chasm. But before we get into that, we got to pay bills. And we're paying bills because we have great sponsors. Not average or good, but a great sponsor. Steve, who's our current sponsor?
Our current sponsor is Final Surge. What is Final Surge?
And they're great.
They are great.
They're great.
How do we know they're great? I use them. All my college training for the summer on Final Surge. Before this, I was having to text a billion people. I mean, there's 30 plus college kids, trying to keep track of it, trying to keep track of injuries and who's beat up and all that, sending out Word documents as schedules. And now I just go on Final Surge, upload my training, easy to move things around, see things visually as a coach, great for planning. But probably the greatest thing is now that kids just put in their workouts, put in their feedback, how they rate how they feel. They have a great pain management app on there that tells me if anything pops up and alerts me. So it allows me to do my coaching more efficiently. So
yeah, step your game up. Get off email. Get off the Excel files. Step your game up. This will make your life 1,000 times easier as longtime coaches who coach people in person or online. Final Surge is a gift. So by all means, hop on, visit Final Surge and get after it.
And the best thing is, a great thing for you listeners is they're going to give you 10% off, which makes it an even better deal. So you can check out the link on either highperformancewest.com in the show notes or scienceofrunning.com in the show notes. Or you can head on over to finalsurge.com/oncoaching and the coupon code, all caps, oncoaching. Got it? Put it in.
Bills paid. That's awesome. Now let's dive in and get to the nitty gritties.
All right. Average, good, and great. So, let me start by saying where this idea came from. It actually was a tweet which came from me watching kids run. Okay, so I was over at St. Mary's University where I teach for their master's program in the UK. And I was watching all these grade school kids go out to the track, and they were about to do essentially a 100-meter stride, right? And there's probably 30 of them, and all shapes, sizes, fitnesses, boys, girls, everything, right? And the coach just lines them all up, all like 30 kids, and says, go, right? And you can tell that like some of them have talent and some don't, right? But that didn't differentiate these kids, right? A handful, 5 or 6 just took off. And they were running as hard as they could to get to the finish line. And, 1 or 2 looked like a natural runner, but, 3 or 4, not natural runners at all. They were just trying, right? And then you go to the blob in the middle, right? And that's where most of them are kind of jogging, kind of going through the motions, but they're running. And that's where the majority of people are. And there were some really good natural-looking runners. There were some people who, maybe didn't have the most talent, but they were just kind of, not trying that hard, and that was the middle. And then at the end, you had, again, 5 or 6 people who were walking, and obviously they could give more effort than that, but they chose to walk the whole thing. And to me, that was like a wonderful analogy or a wonderful, display of the differences in efforts and the differences in groups that become. And what that got me to was this point is that, there's to get to greatness requires a combination of work ethic, talent, and all those things. But to get to good generally just requires effort, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's, and and to be average, doesn't take much, right? It takes kind of going through the motions. But what we're going to talk about today is those different gaps in what it takes to jump across those chasms.
Yeah, crossing the chasm is huge, right? And that's, I think, where we all struggle with as coaches, trying to encourage athletes to make that leap, or even athletes who are really ambitious and motivated, who want to make that leap. And in this day and age, more than ever, I think we have to remember that making those leaps across those chasms is actually, it's not a jump, right? It's building a bridge. And it's a big, big, long bridge, which takes a long time to create. And having that creation horizon clearly defined and articulated, and also, two, being a little bit more fluid and being patient, is not the highest priority for this day and age. And what I mean by that is we live in an instant gratification era. Someone asked me the other day, do you think millennials are entitled? And I don't think at all. I think they're impatient. And it's not their fault, because my generation and Steve's generation, we were impatient compared to our parents, and our parents were impatient compared to their parents. Why? Because connectedness and technology is so accelerated that you can have an instant return on a tweet, on a post, on something you put out in the world, versus having this delayed feedback on whatever you do, right? So, and that's just going to probably perpetuate and continue. So I think it's very clear as coaches, we can't get in our old crotchety, lawn chair and say, oh, these kids, they're just so entitled, they don't know how to work hard. No. They're not. They are just used to instant. And so what we have to do is we have to tell a story, and we have to capture hearts and minds to get athletes and young people today to want to invest in the long haul, right? And so how you do that and how you set that up is, to me, almost as important, in your culture of the coaching crucible that you operate in, as is the X's and O's in structure of the physiological elements of training. And that is, go ahead, Steve.
No, I was just going to say, so I think it was Jay Johnson who tweeted out something about, who is a very good coach who helps out a lot of high school coaches, right? Runs some camps and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he tweeted out, the number of emails and questions I get on nuance of training, right, is enormous compared to the number of emails I get on how do I create a culture to get 30, 40, 50, 60 kids out on the team and hooked up and love running.
Yes.
And like when we're looking at this average to good to great, I think that fits great. It fits perfectly into what most of us should be concerned of, which is how do we get from average to good, right? Because when we're dealing with most athletes, right, or most programs, whether it's high school or college, if we can get to good, then we're going to get 90% of the way, right? And we're going to set the program up so that if someone or something has the chance to make that next jump to the chasm, then we can get there. But a lot of times what happens is we get caught up in the nuance of the details that we might need to worry about when we are, let's say, perfecting someone's training. And we've just skipped over the first chasm, which is to get, hey, let's get everyone on the bus. Let's get everyone hooked up. Let's get everyone fired up and ready to go, to get us the majority of the way.
Right. It's sexy to want to gravitate towards having the right coaching theory. Oh, I have the right coaching theory. I have the right workout structure and programming, because that's what sells, right? Is this illusion that, hey, you buy this, or this coach knows how to train like this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that I'm going to instantly be good. And all I have to do is show up and do the work. But that is the caveat. All the person has to do is show up and do the work. That's the hardest part, because the work is very boring. The work is tedious. It's the same thing over and over and over again, not for a season, not for a year, but year in and year out, if you're going to make that leap. And that's a big reason why, in my opinion, people don't make the jumps from the average category to good and the good to great, because it takes a lot of focus and the attrition rates get higher and higher and higher because the feedback and the return on investment, so to speak, isn't as direct as you move up that ladder. And what I mean by that is, you have a younger athlete and they can PR every single race throughout a season, and that's addicting. That's awesome. I'm getting better. I'm seeing improvement. Who doesn't love to see the bank account, the money in the bank account go up? That's awesome. And then they reach the plateau the next season or 2 seasons down the road, and now they have to have a gut check. I'm running harder than I ever have run before. I'm training better than I have ever trained before. I'm training more than I've ever trained before. Why am I not seeing performance that's the best I've ever seen? And I like to remind people, that's not just you who struggles with that. Bob Kennedy struggled with that when he set the American record way back when in the 90s, right? There's a great quote. It was a blog post many weeks ago on the highperformancewest.com blog that I do. And it's, Bob expressed just that. I don't get why my performance is not honoring or not at the level of my preparation. I'm doing the most, best, fastest work. I feel great. This is incredible. And yet I can't, hit a PR. He wasn't even worried about breaking the American record. He was just worrying about hitting. This is Bob freaking Kennedy, right? So, I remind people it's not just you and it's not just the athletes you're working with, but we have to now shape the culture and we have to shape expectations about what the maturation horizon is for the work. And then also, too, that's just not 1 + 1 = 2, right? If you just run 5 miles and then you do, 10 times a quarter at your mile race pace, it doesn't mean, you do that on Wednesday. On Saturday, you're going to PR, right? We have what we call the body has delayed responses to this type of work, and sometimes the delayed response is not 3 days but 3 weeks.
Yeah, no, that's a brilliant point there, especially with Bob Kennedy. Is sometimes I think we have to take and put things in perspective, right? And as an athlete, what happens is we lose that, and as a coach, we lose that perspective because we don't know what it takes to get to that level. Right? We don't know that they are dealing with a lot of times the same issues, the same problems, the same, breakdowns in understanding and communication or whatever it is, or same doubts that we often are. So I think to maybe give some structure to this, let's start off with let's kind of dive into what does it take to get from average to good. I'd be curious. Go ahead, John.
So for me, from a training perspective, right, I think you need to classify the different training effects. And so we know there's 3 different training effects that if you do a certain type of work, let's start there at the physical side. And then, we'll talk about the physical side, and then we'll talk about the psychological side or the mental side. So first we have the immediate training effect, right? And that's where everyone centrates and focuses on. I ran this 400 meters at 800 meter pace. Oh my gosh, hands on the knees. That was really hard. Coach wants me to do a 300 at the same pace, 200, 100, etc., right? We invest so much in this era in the immediate effects that we lose sight of the other more important training effects. So the second one is the residuals, right? The residual training effect is essentially the effect that previous repetition or previous set of repetitions is going to have on the next set, right? And so if you're doing, let's say, 4 sets of 4 times 400 at your 3,000 meter race pace on the track, and you're breaking them up into sets like that, you have to understand that 4th set that might be at, let's just pick a random number, 72 seconds per lap, is not going to feel the same as the first or second set because of the residual training effect. So a little less immediate, but still in the context of an actual session. And where I operate and live a lot, is the third, which is the more long-term horizon, which is the cumulative training effect, right? So how do all the training units within a micro session and from week to week or day to day, week to week, and month to month, and even season to season, how they culminate? What's the culmination of doing, a long run and 2 lifts a week, and strides, tracking 60 miles a week or 100 kilometers a week? What's the cumulative effect of those? And so it's getting very clear with the athlete about where their lens is and where their expectation is, because I tell you, most people, and it's not just athletes, it's people, live in now more than ever the immediate effect world. But as a coach, and from a training preparation and readiness standpoint, physically, we have to always be thinking the cumulative world.
Yeah, it's about perspective, right? And what happens is you get locked in to certain perspectives. I remember when I was an athlete, like I would get locked in on every single workout, right? Where it's, okay, I have to run this workout at this time in order to, prove to myself that I can race this. Or like, this is the most important thing I'm going to do, is this workout. And as a coach, you have to have the opposite perspective, which you just kind of described, is you're the big picture, right? You have to zoom in and out, but at the whole time, you're looking at the big picture. And I see this all the time when I'm talking to athletes, where they might, go back and we might dialogue back and forth on a workout we're about to do, or a workout that we've done. And they might say, well, this was a little slower than last time, and, I'm worried about this because of, I didn't quite hit what I thought I could, et cetera, et cetera. And I have to say, hey, whoa, wait a minute. Like, look at the big picture, right? You did this workout for this reason. 3 days ago, you did this, which tired you out more than last time you did it. You're in the middle of this mileage week and this cycle and this, emphasis period. What you did is totally fine, right? And, once you show them and explain to them, it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't see that. I was just focused on this individual workout was better or wasn't better or whatever than the last time I did that. And as a coach, it's really easy to get stuck into that training as well, but your job isn't. Your job is to see that big picture. And I think, where we're talking about jumping chasms, is that's for a coach, not necessarily an athlete. But for a coach, I think that's where that first chasm lies, is not getting stuck into the minutia day-to-day of, I need to nail this workout or get better at this, and only seeing that. And when you only see that, you sacrifice everything coming down the line, right? But if you can see the big picture, then you see how it all fits together, and you see, hey, if I'm taking a little hit here, that's fine because it's supposed to.
And that bookends, into the psychology of it, right? Because it's the same situation. The immediate training effect, those are the people who are average, right? The average mindset. I want to have a sensation, an experience, some type of immediate feedback based on this micro unit or singular unit of work, right? And so that's where a lot of people spend time, is this immediacy. That's the average mindset. It's all about now. Now you jump to the good people, the good athletes. Those people who are good, they have a understanding and they have a confidence in the residuals, that if I do, this interim, body of work, or do this and this and this, that was influenced by this thing I just did. So again, the context, the psychological context syncs up as well with the physiological and training context here. Those good people understand the residual impacts of things that happened before, and also how the current state of being is going to influence things that are immediately coming down the road. Now, the great ones, they're the ones who live in the cumulative world, right? They're the ones who understand how these 5 med ball throws, coupled with these, 2 sets of 10 plyos, coupled with the 10-mile long run they did the day before, coupled with the 150-meter sprints they're doing tomorrow, coupled with the understanding of how the 8-mile tempo run they're doing in 3 days from now, how all those ingredients create a robust organism that is going to be able to be adaptive and be spontaneous and be able to respond in any competitive crucible that's going to enhance them. And that's the most difficult place to get to. Why? Because you're deprioritizing the singularity about any one training method as the sole, unit that's going to make you 100% better, which is what we want to do, right? Like I had a exchange with a coach who just recently asked me a question online, and they're asking me about hills and sprints and, flying 30s, for speed reserve. And I was telling him, he goes, well, do I have to sacrifice an aerobic day for this? And I said, well, that's a very easy mindset we have as distance running coaches, is to, just focus on aerobic. And if we don't do something aerobic today, it's like this, it's made of sugar, right? Essentially, it's like pouring water on it. Our aerobic capacity is going to evaporate one day. Not the case at all, by any means. However, you have to understand, like, there's a neurological enhancement that happens with doing speed power work. And that neurological enhancement impacts everything else, from running economy, running efficiency, and also the ability to run, at your 10K or 5K race pace with a little bit better power and fluency, right? So it's understanding those trade-offs, but that's where the difference is from good to great in average. And the most difficult thing, and I think Steve maybe, can speak about this as well in your experiences, is if you're coaching someone from a greatness mindset, from a greatness perspective, where you're focused on the cumulative effect of everything that they're doing, but they're operating in an average world, in a world where they're just focused on the immediacy of how many miles did I run this week? Was this workout this week better than the workout last week? Was my time this week better than my time last week? And then how to elevate that person's perspective to a good, moving them from average to good, and then hopefully moving their perspective from good to great.
So I think this is a long and interesting topic, right? Because what we just outlined is essentially almost like the perspective of training, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which is what most of the times you think about in terms of, moving an athlete along these kind of dichotomies that we're talking about. But a lot of times what separates it and what gets us back to that original story there was, when I was talking about the little kids lining up to run 100 meters, it's really a mental mindset perspective thing, right?
Yes.
Do you have the perspective and mindset to reach that level, right? Do you have that great mindset? What does the great mindset mean? It's just what we talked about right there. It's understanding, like, what performance is, what real performance is, not what, you've been sold as performance in terms of hitting times, like, nailing this workout, getting tough, etc., going to whatever. It's understanding what performance is actually about on race day or in game day for those who aren't in a running standpoint. And I think when you look at changing perspectives, what it's about is getting people to see the world through a different lens, right? So most of the time what happens is you get athletes who are stuck in a lens that they can only see through, we'll say, a shade of gray, right? Where this workout is all that matters and I need to, do this to get good, right? And then you what you're trying to do as a coach is broaden it at first and say, no, like, you see it that way. Let's broaden your horizon a little bit and see a little bit more of a big picture, right? Let's see how these things interact a little bit. See how maybe, getting sleep, having recovery, having a good, decreasing mental fatigue going in, whatever the extra things are. Let's see how they impact this one workout now, right? Because now you've taken it out of this small realm and broadened it out. And then you broaden it out again. You say, okay, how do these variables interact, right? What happens, how do you feel after you did a long run and then came back, and tried to do something quick, right? And it's just becoming aware. Step one is this awareness of the big picture. And then I think from there, it's like accepting and realizing and like creating that full transformation into what we'd call for lack of a better term, a great mindset, right? a great perspective where you are focused on the big picture of getting better and not getting caught up in the minutia or the details that distract you from that ultimate test, right? There was a really good quote from a writer, gosh, I'm blanking on his name right now. Jonathan Franzen, who was talking about how the process is what he comes down to. And I tweeted it the other day, but it says, the process will never let you down, even when everything else does. The process is a thing you control. How you show up, the promises you've made, right? And that's that's what he comes down to. And that's what you're trying to get your athlete to, right? The ultimate point is to get them to where they realize that the process of getting better is what gets them to greatness, right? It's not it's not the obsessing over whether I ran this interval in 70 seconds or 68 seconds. It's the process of doing this day in, day out, and gradually climbing the stairs that go up and down towards performance.
It's like a pot of coffee, right? Drip by drip, day by day. And you don't need to have a big drip or a small drip. You just need to have a drip. And, we have this idea about control in training. That's why we obsess so much about it as coaches in the industry and athletes, because if you're telling me that I do X work, that I can expect ABC return, okay, I'm going to do that because you've outlined a very simplistic and attractive and sold me on this equation that by running 100 miles a week, I'm automatically going to get good. And the reality of this is the harsh reality, I should say, about the difference between average, good, and great is it gets lonelier as you go up the ladder, right? Because great people, great athletes, great coaches, they have a different calculus. They think different. They interpret what's going on much different than the average track fan, right? This kind of goes back to, my little axe to grind here with Shelby Houlihan. And, recently, she's been having a great season. And she was quoted as saying, oh, well, I've always had speed, but I never had strength. And then all these kind of, strength hogs or mileage hogs hopped on the bandwagon and said, yeah, strength. You got to do strength work to get better. And it's like, whoa, time out. Shelby Houlihan's a very, very, very high outlier. She's one, and you have to understand that woman has been fast for a long time. Yes, she's blessed. She moves very well. This is something that's been known on the track circuit for a long time. For her, the type of training she's doing for her is very, very proficient and productive. Now, that doesn't mean we need to all copycat what she's doing, because it might, not everyone has the luxury of living in the mountains for 8 months out of the year and running as much as they do. And also, by the way, I know for a fact, as I've heard it from Jerry Schumacher's mouth, that they do speed work. They do 150s. They do 400s. Like, it's not just pound and ground, right? I've had these discussions. So, we see something, right? It's confirmation bias now more than ever, and we hop onto that. But the reality is that we need to understand that great people, great athletes, great coaches, they think a lot different. But unfortunately, too, it's lonelier as you get to that top. And, that's the famous saying, right? It's lonely at the top. And we as human beings, we are herd creatures, right? We want to be safe. We want to be secure. We want to have people that we, surround ourselves with. But a lot of times that requires us staying at a lower elevation rather than soldiering our way up for the mountaintop. And I think that's another cognitive thing that kind of stops people from, ascending, if you will, because not a lot of people are going to go on that journey with you. And there's only going to be a handful that can support you up the mountain.
Yeah, and I think that brings us to another great point is, like, it's easy to talk about greatness, but most people don't know what it is. Right.
It's really hard and sometimes depressing.
Yeah, and I think it's like we self-limit ourselves, or we limit ourselves, right? And you never know where the top is, and because you can't know where the top is, right? None of us know where the top is in anything, right? If we did, like, we'd be. Well, I don't know what would be, but you can't see the top of the mountain. So your perspective of what great is different. You know, if I asked you what greatness was, what fast was, there was a great Bob Kennedy quote about this during his days, as he was trying to he was trying to be competitive, right? And to be competitive, he needed to set the American record and run under 13, right? And he knew if I run under 13, I'm going to be in the hunt for the medals. Well, what happened? Geber Selassie and crew came along, and running under 13 wasn't a big deal, and now you needed to run 12:40 whatever. And Kennedy was like, well, I got to what I thought was the mountain, 12:50 whatever, but the mountain had changed, right? The top of the mountain had changed. And that same thing happens with us, is you think you know where you're top of the mountain or where it is, and it changes, right? And
well, horizons aren't stable, right? Yeah. Horizons depend on your point of view and where you're sitting or where you're standing, right? So you're exactly right, Steve. I can stand at what I think's a mountain, but it's really just a butte. And I get to the top of the butte and my horizons change. And I think we have to also coach that and understand that, because greatness, as you said from that quote, is committing to the journey. This is a journey, and there's going to be a lot more downs, unfortunately, a lot more failures than there are going to be successes, but that's part of the process. It's part of the journey. And we talk in training all the time, right, about here's the work demands, work units you can do. Run this many miles, run these many reps, etc. And the great thing about psychology is you can train your mind as well. You can get to think crisper. You can get to think sharper. And how, right? Practical. Let's give people some practical.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to Shelby Houlihan, actually. What people missed, well, they missed a lot on that. Maybe Jerry can one day tell us. But I think what happens is the brilliance in what Jerry did is he changed horizons, right? So Shelby was a 800, 1500 type in college, ran cross, yeah. But, he got her to run indoor 5Ks, right? He got her to be able to do the long stuff and change her horizons on what type of runner she was, because she became someone who could run anything, right? And how often have we seen the 800, 1500 runner who says, whoa, wait a minute, like 5K? I'm not running a 5K,
Right,
like yeah. I'm not doing that. Like Jerry, and he did the same thing with, Emily Enfeld. 10K, she was a 1500 runner in college.
Yep.
And the solution isn't to move everyone up, but it's to change horizons, right? It's to not limit yourself because you don't know where you're going to be. There's also been, examples of athletes who have moved down and done things. The great 800 runner from the early 2000s, Andre Bucher, was a junior 10,000 meter runner, and he just moved down. But you can only do that if you are open to having your horizon changed, and not to go on another side rant. But I see this all the time in college. And in high school, is an 800 runner willing to run cross country, especially in college? Is a male willing to run 10K or 8K? Do they adapt to it and say, you know what, this isn't my wheelhouse, but I'm going to give it a go? And let's see what we can do with it, all the while maintaining their speed and all that stuff, obviously, but let's go for it. Or are they incapable of changing that horizon and instead default to their built-in excuse of, oh no, I can't run cross country because I'm an 800 runner, and if I do that, I'm going to lose all my speed and it's not going to benefit me. And then you say, well, no, we'll maintain that. No, that's too long for me. What they've just done there is they've self-limited themselves, right? And they've stuck on the average or the good, depending on their talent level. But they're never going to make it to greatness because they didn't do what Shelby did, which is say, okay, you think a 5K is gonna develop me for this 1500? Great, let's try and run a 5K.
And let's not also underestimate where, Shelby's season this year, or even Drew Wendell's season, last outdoor season, and this indoor season, what the genesis of those seasons were. It came from a failure indoors, right? Shelby made the world team, but then she got rocked at the Worlds, rocked. And she was just beside herself. A very frustrated moment for someone who thought she was doing world-class work and being world-class. She was not a factor at all with the World Indoor Championships, right? 5th. So what happened there between that time and now? There was some soul searching, I'm sure. There's a lot of dialogue. There was also this reaffirmation and recommitment to her process of saying, I'm on the right track. I'm trying to get up this mountain. Okay, I have to shift my horizons now about what do I have to do from not only a physical work standpoint, but a mental, emotional readiness standpoint. And the same thing happened with Drew Wendell. People don't remember in 2017, Drew Wendell got rocked indoors. He was not a non-factor at the end. And then all of a sudden he had a little soul-searching moment. He and his coach, Danny Mackey's a good friend of ours, really just dialed in, okay, why am I doing this? What am I doing? And gave Drew, and Drew created answers to that kind of crisis of failure. And from there, made a world team outdoors that became a world indoor medal this last 2017 indoors in the 800, right? Silver. This is from a guy who the year prior was a non-factor at the U.S. Indoor Championships. So we tend to want to be sold on all you got to do is work. All you got to do is just show up, go through emotions, and do this amazing amount of work, and strength's going to just magically make you good. And I'm here to argue that that's just one piece of the ingredient, or one ingredient to the puzzle. Because we have to think deeper, and we have to think clearly about what greatness really is. It's that responsiveness to adversity, that responsiveness when things don't go our way or as planned. Most people recoil and get depressed and back off or quit or move on, say, oh, guess I just suck, But the great ones, they rebound from it like a basketball or a bouncy ball. You hit it, you smack it against the ground with a lot of force. Yeah, it stays on the ground and goes really low, but then it decompresses and bounces back up. And that's what the great ones have, is that ability to rebound over and over and over again.
Yeah, well, that's resiliency in a nutshell, right? People think that like resiliency and toughness is like gritting through things, but actually it's your ability to bounce back, right? It's your ability to handle a stressor and then process your way through it, and then come back even stronger, right? Or come back having learned and grow from things. And I think that's where you see, again, that separation from good to great is what happens when you get a reality check, when you get that perspective of, I'm not good enough yet, right? Or I am not at the level that I thought. Do you go back home and, pout and, maybe, blame someone else, which happens a lot? Do you blame, my coach didn't prepare me enough, I should have been doing this, or that other athlete did this, or like I got, someone got in my way untactically, so it was their fault. Do you blame other people, or do you come back and commit to your process and say, all right, how do I grow and get stronger from this? And if I've seen anything from a coaching standpoint, is that moment, right? That moment where you get your ass kicked a little bit, or your perspective changed in maybe a negative manner, is what separates people. And you see it all the time. It's almost amazing to watch, where it's like, okay, like, how are they going to come back from this? And as a coach, you try and guide and try and help provide the resources and like push them along in a way, but it's up to them to do it. And sometimes you see it, and it's heartbreaking in the sense that you see them go the wrong direction, and you're just like, oh, like this, this was your moment. Like, you know what I mean? You almost want to grab them and be like, shake them and be like, this was the moment. Like, this was the defining point. Like, you just got, you know, your butt handed to you, but like, it's an opportunity because, you know, it's an opportunity to go back and like have your perspective changed and realize, okay, this is what it takes, right?
Right.
And so it's almost sad to see athletes, you know, choose the other route, the easier route, right? It's easier to kind of put the blame on something else or someone else than confront reality. And I think it was Percy Sarity who talked about how training is coming to terms with reality, finding and confronting reality, right? And and that's what we're doing. And once you come to that reality, and if it's not what you want, you have a choice to make. And that choice determines if you just settle or, you know, work your way towards greatness.
Well, and I think a media example of that is, you know, Brian, right? The most world famous fall in the steeplechase, you know, went from potentially winning the NCAA championship to not, right? I mean, how did Brian respond, right? You know, and how he did respond gave me hope for Brian and, you know, what he can accomplish down the road. But, you know, Steve, maybe take us through that moment, because that was a moment Brian could just say, look, I'm done running. I thought I was going to win the NCAA title and I didn't. I'm going to move on with my life and do something else. But what was Brian's response after that, especially some of the, you know, negative immediate media feedback as well?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I've never gone from such a high to such a low as a coach, and I'm sure him as an athlete. And, you know, for those who don't know what we're talking about, briefly, you can look it up. It was on SportsCenter. But Brian was leading the steeplechase at NCAA championships until the last lap with 300 meters to go just fell hard on a hurdle barrier and went from winning by 20 meters to, you know, finishing 11th. And I think the bigger thing about this was that we were in the team hunt, right? So
yeah.
So it wasn't just about Brian missing an NCAA championship. It was about, hey, we just won the 4x1, right? Brian is leading the steeplechase as our 300-meter studs who are in the final, who eventually two of them went 1-2, are watching this live as, you know, in the warm-up area on the TV as they're about to head out. And we're about to potentially make a statement of winning a 4x1 steeple and 100 all in a row, and setting up the team. And in that moment, like where he fell and comes down, like it's not just him, it's like everybody else as the team. And, you know, in watching it, you know, I guess, well, when I first got to Brian, you know, in the medical tent, you know, that's what was first came out of him, is he's like, he was pretty upset, but he was pretty upset because he was like, I didn't score, you know? And it was like, he was like, I got up, I don't know what happened, I got up, like, and all I was thinking of, top 8 score, you're in the top 8, try and stay in the top 8, you know? And I think that right there pointed to me, at least, where it's like, okay, here's a kid who just got hit hard, right? Hit his head on the ground, almost tore a ligament in his shoulder. And, you know, he gets up and he's thinking, okay, I've got to get the finish line because my team needs me. And I think that's a lot of perspective there. And then afterwards, you know, and watching him kind of bounce back from it, it wasn't a despair of, you know, oh man, like I failed. It was a look at, okay, like that really sucked. This is going to sting for a while, but like I did everything that I could in that race, right? I went for it, trying to be perfect, to put my team in a position to win, right? And looking back, it was like I wouldn't have changed the tactics at all because that was the best chance we had, right? That was the best chance for me individually, but also to secure as many points for our team as possible. And I think looking at that outlook, was really interesting, and I, kind of hit home of, okay, here's the kid who's processing it in real time, right? He's sitting there figuring out, okay, how do I meld this quote unquote failure into my story? And it became something of, it hit me hard, but it showed people who I am and what I do. And, that night after, we were sitting there with the coaches and a bunch of athletes and a bunch of fans who are Houston fans who traveled out, and, everyone's talking to, or actually before this, Brian went up to his room, right? And then we were walking to dinner, and everyone's like talking about Brian and how bad it felt. And our athletic director was, telling me to tell him stuff. And everyone's like, Brian's probably not coming to dinner. I didn't think he was coming to dinner because it's, 10 o'clock at night. He'd just gone through all this. As I said, he was pretty banged up and badly hurt. And he walks into the restaurant after we've been there for about 30 minutes, sits down next to people, and I'm like, oh man, I didn't think you were coming. And he's like, no, I wouldn't miss this. This is like my team. This is my family. You guys came to support me. Like, I wouldn't miss it for the world. And like that moment right there kind of showed me like he gets the bigger picture of things, right? As it would have been easy to retreat and feel sorry for himself and woe is me, and like, oh, this is going to impact everything, and like, I can't believe it, I have the best, or I have the worst luck in the world. And he just kind of processed it as best he could, and then, realized the bigger picture of, yes, this is one thing, but this is one thing of many, many races that I have to do in the future. And he bounced back, and the funny thing is he was like, I want to run USA's, and he didn't run for 4 or 5 days after NCAA champs, and there were 2 weeks in between. So he missed, 5 days of work, right? And why did he do that? Because he couldn't turn his shoulder, right? So he couldn't swing his arm to run. So he went on the bike and spun for a little bit, right? But that's it. And he couldn't even hurdle until... Actually, his first hurdle was 2 days before the meet, and he couldn't bend over when he hurdled. He had to stay upright. So, he practiced a couple more on the warm-up before the USA Championships, and USA's didn't go that well. But he was like, well, I can't bend over. I can't, use my arm to do this, so we'll just see what happens. But I thought it showed a lot about his resiliency and just saying, hey, I want to be here because I qualified and it's a US championship. And if I get my ass kicked, that's okay, because it wasn't, I didn't have the preparation that everyone else had, but I'm going to go in and do everything I could. And he did. And it would have been much easier to say, you know what, I'm banged up. I'm not going to run the US championships because it might hurt my chances of getting a sponsorship, or it might hurt my chances because, I might not be at peak fitness or whatever because I had this happen. But he said, no, it's a US champ. It's an opportunity, it's a gift. You never know when you qualify. I'm going to do it. And I think that those two instances kind of point to Brian's resiliency, more than anything else.
And to me, that's the definition of greatness. Having that clarity to make those tough decisions, to be able to absorb and then respond to, a crushing defeat, but with confidence, integrity, yes, disappointment, but to be able to keep showing up. And this is what Desi Linden means by keep showing up, right? Brian demonstrated this throughout the whole 2-week period after that crushing fall, right? He just kept showing up. And that is so hard in this day and age, kind of getting back to the impatience dialogue we had about the current form of athlete, and even kind of current, new breed of coaches, is like this impatience about wanting to see an immediate return on our work, this impatience about wanting to have immediate positive feedback, and I did something good, so I can post something good because I can get the social kudos for it. That's not real. The real thing is the decisions and the dialogues that are being made offline between athlete and coach, and even athlete in his or her own world. And that's, I think, a lot of times what Steve and I in this podcast try to recommend to every coach is encourage that internal dialogue. Give people tools that's going to help them think crisper and think more clearly. And one of the things I always try to encourage people is write it down. Not write it down on your phone, but pen to paper. Keep a paper journal with a pen. This was told to me long ago by Vin Lanana when I asked how he had his athletes at Stanford and Oregon keep training logs. And he goes, I always believed, even when, all the technology started to get easier and more fluid, that there was importance for an athlete to write down on a piece of paper their physical training because it made it real. And that, I think, is more than anything, when you manifest and create those strokes on the paper, and makes your thoughts real. And you just write every day. Just write a little, write a little, write a little. Steve and I, we have, I don't know how many stacks of notes, or our note, like we both keep a notebook journal that's just a bunch of ideas, right? And ideas are cheap. I mean, we must have, 100 ideas a day. Then we just write them down and get out, and the next things come. But this is what great scholars do. This is what great athletes do. This is what great business people do. This is what great, husbands and wives do, right? They leave each other like little love notes, or et cetera. But write it down, because that's going to be really help people articulate and clarify their thoughts. Because why? I have to choose this word over that word. I have to choose this sentiment and this sentence over this other one. I have to make choices. That's why writing down is important, because you have to make definitive choices about what to express on the piece of paper. And that's the same reality that you have come race day, or come performance day, come game day. You have to make definitive choices in the moment, and you can't rely on all this preparation and go back and check through your preparation, checklist to say, okay, now I can catch the ball. Okay, now I can sprint. Okay, now I can, now I have the green light from coach to run the last 200 all out. You have to be responsive in the moment as the moment is shaped. And that's the beauty of sport, right? Is we have these unpredictable arenas where we know there's constraints in a finite setting of we're running this distance, or playing, a game with a ball for this long, within these boundaries. But what can happen is, in between that start and finish is infinite, is at anyone's desire. And that's the beauty of what we're trying to get to, is move and shepherd yourself to that greatness. And part of the greatness is being okay with instability, being okay with unpredictability, being okay with a little bit of lack of control, because it affords you the opportunity to create. And that's what I remind people all the time, is when you release control a little bit, that's when you're able to create your greatest work. But when you're so narcissistic and worried and sheltered by this illusion, this crutch of having to control every little thing and have it be quantifiable and measurable and objective, and you lose the spirit of what sport to me is about. And to finish off this, podcast with one last tangent, it goes back to the, article I read recently about how over measuring everything, from a performance readiness standpoint, like over measuring, okay, what's people's pulse? What's people's reaction times? What's people's heart rate variability? What's, an athlete's this and that? Like that over measuring is actually muting our ability to train and muting our ability to perform, because we're sending a signal that, we want to be preventive of injuries, or we want to be, responsive and not create an injury situation by an overload situation for an athlete. But we're also saying a signal that you only can do the work when you're perfect. You only can do the work when you feel like, oh yeah, I'm fine today because I took 3 days off. But we know that is not training, that's not preparation, that's not performance. Some of the greatest, memories are like Michael Jordan's flu game, right? When he played in the NBA final with the flu. Or even more explicitly, Brian here. He went into USA's, not 100%, still a jacked up arm, or shoulder, but he showed up to still compete and see what he had despite the adversity he was facing. That, more than anything, to me at least, is an indication of greatness and why I have a lot of hope and excitement for Brian, not only in the future of his running career, but also the future of what he's going to do in the world as a young man and older man.
So I'll end with this, is from a college standpoint and having coached high school as well, is I like to tell both my student athletes and the recruits' parents that you can tell if a person or an athlete is going to be successful in life based on their decisions and choices they make in running, right? And I think that is what you got to there, is generally you can tell who's going to be able to handle it and do it and be resilient and bounce back and handle life and succeed at just about anything they want to do based on those choices. You know, I can think back of athletes I've had through the years on the college ranks, and been here long enough to see some of them take jobs and grow up and develop now. And it's just that you can see, okay, this person's got it. Like they are making the hard choice, or they are showing up. They're going to do this. And that doesn't matter if it's for a race or if it's for, you know, some business opportunity or getting fired in work and bouncing back from it. And I think that's where, you know, where this model of average to good to great, like, yes, we're talking about coaching. Yes, we're talking about performance, but it branches out to life, right? There's a reason that they're the best-selling book, Good to Great. It has sold a billion, you know, not that many, but thousands of copies, right? It's because people want to know, what does it take to get there, and a lot of times people look for a secret to get there, but as they found in that book, as we found in looking at athletes, is there's no grand secret, right? It's creating people and athletes who are resilient enough to handle the ups and downs of life, of training, and have the mindset to be able to grow and develop regardless of what's thrown at them. And I think that is, if there's quote unquote a secret, that's it.
And that's culture, right? I mean, That's what that book Good to Great's about. That's what Mike Smith has created at NAU. You know, why everyone's fascinated by NAU, or even Rob Connor at University of Portland, like in the men's NCAA cross country world, or the culture you guys have at University of Houston, Speed City. You know, Burrell's comments after he won the 100 saying he did it for Brian, right, at NCAAs. Like, that's culture. You can't manufacture that. You can't fake that. But what you can do is you can create an environment. And that's what we as coaches are. We're curators of an environment. And sometimes, despite your best efforts, the culture slipped away from you that season. Despite everything you try to say and do, you just have players or athletes on the team or on your roster that you're working with who just aren't aligned with the culture. And that's okay. It's not a bad thing. You don't need to correct them, but it might not be for them, right? And I always remind people, as you get more comfortable and more secure and enthused about your coaching practice, just know, like, one of the key critical constituents for developing and elevating is alignment. And some people, no matter what you do or how much you offer or what you give them, they're just not aligned, or they were aligned and no longer aligned. So remember, culture. That's what we mean when we're saying culture, is this responsiveness of creating an environment that affords people this resiliency in disappointing moments to rebound and get the best out of them after the disappointment. That's what the great ones do, over and over and over again.
And you know what else the great coaches do?
What's that, Steve?
They use Final Surge.
Oh, yes, they do. It's a great platform.
Final Surge has made the transition from good to great in terms of coaching platforms. In all seriousness, they are athletes and runners themselves who have coached individuals, and they created it from the ground up to enable us to do our jobs better. So if you want to do your jobs better, be able to spend more time creating the culture versus spending time in your Excel spreadsheet, then please check out Final Surge. Again, finalsurge.com/oncoaching. Use the coupon code ONCOACHING to get your 10% off, and to let them know that, hey, this sponsorship is working, and that they can continue to sponsor and help bring us these great episodes that they are. So Thanks again, everyone, for listening. As always, check out our blogs and everything that's going on at highperformancewest.com, or check out John and I on Twitter. That'll be in the show notes. Just to keep us informed, or to keep you informed on what's going on, not so much from a marketing standpoint, but because we want to make sure that what we're putting out in the world is of value, and that hopefully you guys see some value from it too, and that we can interact with you. You all on the social media, and you guys can help us
in person. Better. Most importantly, in person. Like, it's been so awesome to go to track meets and have conversations with coaches and young coaches and people who are listeners. And thank you for taking what we put on offer and considering it. By no means do you have to agree with everything that we say. That's not the point. The point is just to create a contribution that's going to help elevate how we all practice and how we all think and operate to try to do the good work we're trying to all do as coaches, as teachers in this world while we have air in our lungs.
Yep, exactly.